Bruce Lee had a student in 1967 who disappeared without explanation. 20 years later, that student's son knocked on Shannon Lee's door. What he carried with him revealed a side of Bruce Lee that nobody had ever documented. Los Angeles, September 1967. Bruce Lee's school on College Street, a Tuesday evening class. 8 students. The usual mix, some serious, some curious, some still figuring out why they came. All of them watching Bruce move through a demonstration with the particular attention of people witnessing something they can't fully process, something too fast for the eye, too precise for ordinary understanding. One student stands slightly apart from the others, not physically, in attention. His name is Robert Kai, 26 years old, Japanese-American, 3rd generation. His grandparents came from Osaka. His parents were born in California. Robert was born in Los Angeles. Grew up between worlds the way 3rd-generation immigrants do. Fully American in most ways, but carrying something older, something his grandparents brought across the ocean that didn't fully translate into English. Robert has been training with Bruce for 4 months. He's good, not exceptional, but serious. The kind of student who does the homework, who comes early and stays late, who asks questions that show he's thinking, not just absorbing. Tonight, Bruce is demonstrating the 1-inch punch, the technique he made famous at the Long Beach tournament 2 years ago. He explains the mechanics, the internal generation of force, the relationship between relaxation and explosion, the way power travels through the body like a wave rather than being produced at the point of impact. Robert watches, then asks, what does it feel like from the inside? Not the mechanics, the experience of it. What are you aware of in the moment before impact? Bruce stops, looks at Robert. Most students ask about technique, about application, about how to replicate what Bruce does. Robert is asking about the interior experience, about consciousness in the moment of action, about what it's like to be Bruce Lee from the inside. This is a different kind of question, the kind Bruce finds interesting, the kind that opens a different kind of conversation. Stay after class, Bruce says. They talk for 2 hours after the other students leave. Not about technique, about awareness, about the relationship between the body and the mind in moments of extreme physical precision, about what happens to consciousness when the body performs at its limits, about the space between intention and action. Robert is a psychology student working on his doctorate. His research focuses on peak performance states, flow states, the psychological conditions that produce extraordinary physical and cognitive performance. He came to Bruce's school not just to learn martial arts, to understand something about consciousness from the inside, from someone who operates at the far edge of human physical capability. Bruce is fascinated, not by the academic framework, by the questions underneath it, the same questions he's been asking himself for years through training. What is happening in the body and mind during perfect execution? Where does the self go when technique becomes completely automatic? Is there a state of physical performance that is also a state of consciousness? Can martial arts be a path to understanding the mind, not just the body? They meet weekly after class. Robert comes to the group session, then stays. They talk, exchange frameworks, Bruce providing the experiential data, Robert providing the psychological theory. 2 young men trying to understand something fundamental about human consciousness through the unlikely lens of martial arts. Bruce talks about things he doesn't talk about elsewhere, about the experience of fighting in complete flow, where there is no Bruce Lee making decisions, just response, pure response, the self dissolving into the action, the gap between stimulus and response closing to nothing, not because he trained to close it, because the self got out of the way. Robert documents everything, not for his thesis, not yet, just documenting, capturing what Bruce says with the rigor of a researcher, the specific language Bruce uses, the specific descriptions, the phenomenology of peak performance from the inside of someone who lives there regularly. 6 months pass. Robert is one of Bruce's most intellectually engaged students, not his most skilled, not his most physically gifted, but the one who asks the questions that make Bruce think about what he does in ways he hasn't thought about it before. Then one Tuesday, Robert doesn't come to class. Bruce notices, doesn't think much of it. Students miss classes, life happens. Robert doesn't come the next week either, or the week after. After a month of absence, Bruce asks another student if they've seen Robert. Nobody has. Robert has simply disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye, no letter, no contact. Bruce thinks about reaching out, decides against it. If Robert wanted to explain, he would have. People disappear from things for their own reasons. Those reasons belong to them. Bruce respects this. He doesn't hear from Robert Kai again. 20 years pass. Bruce dies in 19... The world mourns, continues. The legend grows. The legacy expands. Shannon grows up, takes on the work of carrying her father forward. The Bruce Lee Foundation, the management of his image, the decisions about what gets shared and what stays private. 1987, Shannon is 18 years old. A young man appears at the door of the Lee family home. Mid-20s, Japanese-American, serious face, carrying a cardboard box, not large, but clearly heavy. Shannon opens the door. "My name is James Kai," he says. "My father was Robert Kai. He trained with your father in 1967. My father died last month. He left instructions that I should bring this to you." He holds out the box. Shannon takes it. "Come in." They sit in the living room. James explains what he knows. His father, Robert, studied with Bruce Lee for 6 months in 1967, disappeared from the school without explanation, never talked about why, but kept something from that time. The box. "What's in it?" Shannon asks. "I don't know exactly. My father kept it locked his whole life, left me the key with instructions to bring it to you after he died. He said you would know what to do with it." Shannon opens the box. Inside, notebooks. 6 of them, filled with Robert Kai's handwriting. Dense, precise, dated entries going back to October 1967, and a sealed envelope addressed to Bruce Lee, still sealed, still unread, written in 1967 and never sent. Shannon reads the first notebook. Robert's documentation of his conversations with Bruce, detailed, rigorous. Everything Bruce said about the interior experience of martial arts, about consciousness during peak performance, about the self-dissolving into action, about flow states before anyone called them flow states. But there's more. Robert didn't just document Bruce's ideas. He documented Bruce, the person, the private observations of a psychology researcher watching a subject with trained attention. He wrote about Bruce's anxiety, the constant drive that looked like confidence from the outside but felt from the inside like running, like someone being chased by something he couldn't name. Robert recognized it. He'd seen it in his research. The high performers who couldn't stop, who pushed beyond healthy limits because stopping felt like dying, because the performance was how they outran something they didn't want to face. He wrote about Bruce's relationship with approval, how he watched Bruce with senior martial artists. The slight change in posture, the almost imperceptible need to be seen as legitimate by those who represented traditional authority, the ways the confident performance cracked slightly in those moments, showed something underneath, something still seeking the validation it never quite received. He wrote about Bruce's love for his students, not the teaching love, the personal love, the way Bruce tracked each student's progress, not just technically but humanly. Noticed when someone was struggling outside the school, asked questions that went beyond martial arts, the genuine care that existed beneath the demanding teacher performance. He wrote about Bruce's humor, the private humor, not the public charm, the specific dry observation humor that appeared in unguarded moments, that revealed a mind noticing things about the human comedy of existence that he rarely shared publicly. Too irreverent, maybe, too human for the image. He wrote about Bruce's loneliness, the particular loneliness of someone who is surrounded by people who want something from them. Students wanting teaching, studios wanting performance, the public wanting the legend, and underneath all of that needing something simple, someone who wanted nothing, just company. Robert recognized this because he provided it accidentally. He came for research, found himself genuinely interested, not in Bruce Lee the subject, in Bruce Lee the person, and Bruce noticed, felt the difference, talked differently with Robert than with anyone else. Not the teacher, not the performer, just a person talking with another person. Then Robert disappeared. The notebooks explain why. His research supervisor found out about the sessions, told Robert he couldn't use the material, that researching a subject without their informed consent was ethically problematic, that documenting private conversations without permission was a violation of research ethics. Robert had a choice: stop the research, or come clean to Bruce about what he was doing. He couldn't do either. Couldn't stop because the notebooks had become something more than research, had become a record of something he valued too much to end professionally. Couldn't come clean because he was afraid of what Bruce would think, of losing the friendship, of Bruce seeing the relationship as exploitation rather than genuine connection. So he disappeared, the coward's exit, the option that avoided confrontation at the cost of everything. He carried the guilt for 20 years, the notebooks locked in a box, the unsent letter to Bruce that he wrote in 1968 and never found the courage to send, the explanation and apology that Bruce never received. When Bruce died in 1973, Robert's guilt compounded. The conversation he was going to have someday was no longer possible. The explanation he was going to give when he found courage was no longer receivable. He kept the box locked for 20 years, not to protect himself, to protect what was in it. The record of a remarkable mind. The documentation of Bruce Lee thinking about things nobody else was documenting. The private observations of a person who saw something true and couldn't figure out how to be honest about how he saw it. Shannon reads all 6 notebooks over 3 days, then reads the unsent letter. Robert's letter to Bruce is 6 pages, written in 1968, explaining what he did, why he disappeared, what the notebooks contain, what he observed, what he valued about the conversations, what he's sorry about. It ends. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that what I recorded in those notebooks is the most honest portrait I've ever seen of any human being. Not your technique, not your philosophy. You, the person who gets tired and scared and lonely and funny and loving and human in the spaces between the performance. I documented that because I thought it deserved to be documented, because I thought the person was as worth knowing as the legend, maybe more. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to ask permission first. I hope someday someone who loves you reads these and knows you more completely because of them. Shannon sits with the letter for a long time, then calls her mother. Linda reads the notebooks. All 6. Takes longer than Shannon, reads more slowly, stops more often, because she's recognizing things. The descriptions of Bruce that Robert wrote with the objectivity of a researcher. Linda recognizes them from the inside, from 20 years of being married to the man Robert observed from the outside. The loneliness Linda always sensed but Bruce rarely named, the approval-seeking that existed underneath the confidence, the genuine care for students that Bruce expressed through demanding them rather than comforting them, the private humor that came out only in safe spaces, the running quality, the sense of someone always slightly ahead of something. He saw him, Linda says to Shannon. This man sat in the corner of a martial arts class in 1967 and saw your father, really saw him, and wrote it all down. Should we be angry? Shannon asks. He documented Dad without permission, Linda thinks. Maybe we should be, but I'm not, because the person he documented is someone I loved, and he documented him with love, even if he didn't know it was love, even if he called it research. The attention he paid, the care and the observation, the preservation of things that would otherwise be lost. That's love, whatever he called it. Shannon decides to use the notebooks, not to publish them wholesale, but to inform how she talks about her father, to add depth to the portrait, to access things that exist nowhere else. The private observations of a psychology researcher who sat in a martial arts school in 1967 and saw a human being with unusual clarity and had the presence of mind to write it all down, even if he lacked the courage to be honest about what he was doing. James Kai, Robert's son, becomes a peripheral figure in Shannon's life. Not close, but connected. The son of the man who saw her father clearly, bringing the box his father left, completing the delivery his father spent 20 years building up to. Did your father ever talk about Bruce Lee? Shannon asks James. Not by name, not directly, but sometimes he talked about a teacher he had when he was young, someone who changed how he thought about consciousness and performance, someone he wronged and couldn't make right. He carried it his whole life. The guilt, yes, but I think also the gratitude for what he was given even in the middle of doing something wrong, the access to something real. The conversations that shaped his research for 30 years, the person he was allowed to see clearly even though he saw them by accident and without permission. Robert Kai's doctoral thesis, completed in 1972, changed how researchers understood peak performance states, flow states, the psychology of physical excellence. His framework influenced decades of subsequent research, sports psychology, performance psychology, cognitive science. He never cited Bruce Lee by name, called him Subject A throughout. A martial artist of extraordinary capability who provided unprecedented access to the interior experience of peak physical performance. The thesis that changed a field was built on 6 months of conversations in a Los Angeles martial arts school in 1967. Bruce Lee influenced a field of psychology he never knew existed, through a student he thought disappeared without reason, who was actually watching, documenting, trying to understand. The son he never met brought the evidence to his daughter 20 years later, and his daughter learned something she couldn't have learned any other way, about who her father was when a trained observer watched without the distortion of love or legend or legacy. Just a person, moving through a world that kept trying to make him into something more than that. Remaining underneath everything, a person, the son he never met, the box that arrived 20 years late, the notebooks that saw him clearly, the most complete portrait of Bruce Lee that nobody knew existed.